Every now and again, a certain contentious discourse rears its head in online communities, on social media, and sometimes into the wider cinematic landscape of film clubs, festivals, and Q&As. Are sex scenes really necessary? The more vocal criticisms suggests that sex scenes can be inherently gratuitous, intending to titillate the audience rather than progress the film's narrative. The more conservative criticisms outright dismiss sex scenes as ultimately pornographic. While some films contain scenes that were intended for arousal, and some films don't shy away from using real unsimulated sex, begging the question where do the boundaries between art and pornography lie, which is a question for another time, the discourse seems to rear its divisive head from time to time, and will likely continue to arise. So, let's get down to it. Are sex scenes necessary? One of the key and rather valid concerns regarding sex scenes in cinema is that these have been exploitative in the past, causing trauma for actors uncomfortable with the extent of the scene. While a film set should always be a professional environment placing the cast and crew's safety and well-being at the centre during the production, after all this is a job first and foremost, that is unfortunately not always the case. Safety and well-being is unfortunately not always prioritised. Richard Lawson, writing for Vanity Fair, elaborates on this thoughtfully, using a more recent example where the lead actresses felt exploited by the director, while also highlighting a method in which the industry has adapted to portraying sex on screen in a more professional manner. There is of course a woeful history of actors, quite often women, who have been exploited on unsafe sets by nefarious people both on and off camera. Look to the decade-old controversy surrounding the celebrated film Blue is the Warmest Colour, whose brilliant lead actors Léa Seydoux and Adele Exarchopoulos loudly condemned how their graphic sex scenes were handled almost immediately after they and their director Abdelatif Kechiche shared the Palme d'Or win at the Cannes Film Festival. This was a lauded film handed a major award by Steven Spielberg, who was the Cannes jury president that year. That was made, it would seem, under dire circumstances. The situation has improved some in recent years. The rise of the intimacy coordinator, an on-set consultant who helps actors and directors find a careful and equitable way to stage intimate scenes in the post-Me Too era, has allowed for at least some productions to create safe and consensual spaces. Those coordinators are not cure-all fixes, of course, but they do represent a healthier outlook toward an aspect of filmmaking that had for too long been an unregulated nightmare for many in the industry. If that advancement is factored in, and some people still deem sex scenes not worth it for all the potential risk they pose, that's an understandable position. Blue is the Warmest Colour faced scrutiny over its elongated and graphic sex scenes, both because the lead actresses felt exploited by the director, but also due to how those scenes felt more like titillation for the director, missing the focus of the original graphic novel so much that even the author Jules Moreau criticised the film. The concern for exploitation in sex scenes remains prevalent even in a post-Me Too landscape due to the prominence of inappropriate and coercive behaviour on set that led to cast members feeling manipulated. Richard Lawson mentions that the role of the intimacy coordinator has become more commonplace. They might not fix the societal sexism that can present questionable representations of sex on screen, but they can support a safer working environment when their services are utilised. Whether productions hire an intimacy coordinator is another issue, however, with Sean Baker's Honora receiving criticism when Mikey Madison declined for a coordinator to be on set. In addition to this concern regarding safer production work environments, another factor within the criticism of sex scenes could be due to the commonality of a cinematic landscape full of PG and 12A, or PG-13 in the States, rated films. This might seem a stretch, but bear with me. In terms of common trends, family-friendly and accessible blockbusters often dominate the cinemas, where humour, action, suspense, and a glossier, gentler form of romance is presented. A sex scene or a sexually liberated romance may feel jarring for a much wider audience. This isn't to undermine the successes of sexual dramas like 50 Shades of Grey, where sex is still prominent, albeit in a sillier representation, but that films like this aren't as commonplace as animated adventures, blockbuster thrillers, or flavour of the month horror. Whitney Seybold, writing for /Film, reinforces this point, discussing that many mainstream films focus less on intimacy and more on prioritising excitement. The recent movement to eschew sex scenes appears to spring from a bizarre cultural internalisation of the PG-13 rating. For the better part of the last 15 years, most of the popular movies in the world have been bright, effects-heavy, 4-quadrant hitting action blockbusters with superheroes and/or Wookiees. Such films might feature attractive people, flirty looks, or moments of sexual tension, but few of them feature out-and-out sexual contact between characters. Additionally, these films tend to be very plot and dialogue heavy, leaving out moments of relaxation or silence in place of unending quips, important character moments, or outright exposition. When the plot does slow down, it's to accommodate a 30-minute chase or fight sequence. While this is generalising, not every successful film has been an action-packed blockbuster, as indie titles and highly anticipated films from modern auteurs can still make a significant dent in the multiplexes. From Chloe Zhao's Hamnet to Robert Eggers's Nosferatu, we can see the gist of what Whitney Seybold is getting at here. Audiences more familiar with films that suspend intimacy may simply find sex scenes alienating. This isn't a criticism of what these audiences enjoy. Blockbusters can become modern classics, and most movies that get bums in seats at the cinema still deserve celebrating. But it could be that audiences less aware of on-screen intimacy may find sex scenes distressing. This, however, does open up a bigger subject. If art is a reflection of the societal circumstances and time period it was made within, what does sexless cinema imply about the worldview? Audiences frustrated by sex scenes viewing them as unnecessary or inherently pornographic implies a mindset of conservative censorship, an attitude that suggests sexuality on screen should be shameful, embarrassing, something deemed reprehensible. Whitney Seybold further elaborates on how this attitude of censorship can impact us personally. Audiences have reached a point that mainstream cinematic entertainments are largely sexless, and any tiny crumb of sexuality is savoured. And while leaving most characters' sexualities abstract might provide a broader canvas, it is in many ways a form of censorship. It also feeds into a widespread fear of sex and sexuality that has been deeply infecting an increasingly conservative discourse at large. Removing sex from movies is, in a vital way, removing it from everyday conversation. If people aren't sexual in movies, then they are only sexual in private. If they are only sexual in private, then they will be encouraged to be silent about sexual issues they may face. If we were to hypothetically remove sex scenes from films that featured them, we are also taking the measures to undermine representations of sexuality, of queer love, of authentic intimacy. The measures to also erase sexual concerns, from health, safety, to consent and trauma. While not every film will manage to handle these sensitive topics as thoughtfully as needed, many films do, and by representing them on a cinematic scale, films support the destigmatization surrounding discussions of sex, bodily autonomy, physical health, and personal boundaries. Not only can sex scenes destigmatize sensitive subject matters, but representing sex in filmmaking when handled carefully can also portray the reality of intimacy, recognizing the natural awkwardnesses, the encouraged communication, and the gradual discoveries of one's own sexual and gender identities. Thoughtful sex scenes have certainly been a key part of many film lovers' own self-discovery with their queerness, or can provide food for thought regarding establishing your own boundaries. The worst sex scenes will fail to titillate and can fall into a territory of sexual parody, but the best sex scenes can tap into something profound. So, which films exactly have necessary sex scenes? While there's always going to be films where sex is portrayed gratuitously, many films do manage to place great importance on the subject. David Robert Mitchell's cult horror gem It Follows has an inciting incident hinging on sex, where a curse follows the innocent participant until they have sex with somebody else and pass it on. A story which frames its central curse as an analogy of the anxieties surrounding coming of age, of change, of growing up, an analogy for STDs, or of having one's consent overruled by the selfish needs of another. An infamous example of a central sex scene can be found in Nicholas Roeg's classic horror, Don't Look Now, where grieving parents, after the loss of their daughter, reconnect once again, reliving all their previous passions, adorations, and connections for each other in one vivid sex scene, sharing in their compassion and grief together physically. Other quickfire suggestions for films which contain necessary sex scenes include Donna Deitch's Desert Hearts, where Vivian has sex with another woman for the first time, a milestone in her own queer identity. Yorgos Lanthimos' brief sex scene in Power First, Ego Rolliker, The Favourite, demonstrates the secrecy and discretion needed for Queen Anne to have her sexual needs met by another woman. Alan Clark's Rita Sue and Bob 2's sex scenes demonstrates the power imbalances between working-class women and the middle-class suburbanite looking for a quick fling, as well as the racial divisions in Yorkshire between genders. And the less said about the secrets of Park Chan-wook's Oldboy, the better. Discover those for yourself. This is barely an extensive list, but even in these brief recommendations, in my personal opinion, each of these films are great. We can recognise that sex scenes are a necessity. Whereas elongated scenes of sex aren't needed in a film like Blue is the Warmest Colour, if a film manages to find ways where sex is central to the narrative, then ultimately yes, sex scenes remain necessary. In conclusion, this is a topic that deserves more nuance than it might receive in social media spaces. While yes, many films do manage to make sex gratuitous, which can sometimes be a stylistic decision in itself, for example a majority of the Pinku Aiga movement in Japan, and some of the reasons why people find them unnecessary can be valid. After all, plenty of viewers likely feel more at ease watching something they know was made safely and ethically, due to the knowledge of cinema's past with on-set exploitation. A lot of films manage to handle the portrayal of sex with sensitivity, nuance, and understanding of its significance for the central characters. With a keen editorial eye that knows when a scene has gone on long enough, many sex scenes can indeed be necessary to the story. A special thank you to my incredible tier Patreon supporters Gil, Jared Spears of Concessions, Javier Grillo Maxwatch and Keith Gaylor, and my super tier Patreon supporters Sportzilla and Eclair.